Well, greetings and salutations, and welcome once again to the Newsman Weekly Podcast, episode number 29. Yes, folks, we are back once again. Thanks again to local country singer Luke Watson for crafting this show's theme song. I honestly don't know where we'd be without it. Today, I'm joined once again by Zach Heiser, the executive producer of the Newsman Weekly. Good morning, Zach. I saw your Cleveland Cavaliers got hammered over the weekend by the Indiana Pacers. Is it true, and is the bloom coming off the rose in Cleveland?
We haven't even talked Cavs on this podcast, and you bring them up after one of their 5 losses.
Yeah, that's kind of what I do.
Best team in the NBA.
Best record in the NBA.
Okay, right. Well, it's been a good ride so far. I'm enjoying this regular season, so no.
So you're not concerned at all that they've been exposed for the frauds that perhaps they are.
In pro sports, this isn't Marion local, right?
Okay.
Every team is got pro athletes, so losses happen.
I wasn't even really sure they lost till the guy we're about to mention, Grant Ritchie, came in and threw it up in your face that the Cavs lost over the weekend. So.
Hey, I like the Cavs too. I just want them to make a deep playoff run. We'll see.
What is a deep playoff? What would satisfy Cleveland Cavalier fans this season? Is it NBA title or bust, or is it taking the Celtics to a crushing Game 7 defeat?
Yeah, I think if we make it to the conference finals.
Well, yeah, before the year it was like, all right, well, first, 2 years ago they lost the first round, then they got to the second round. Now, it's, the natural progression is conference finals, but I think they're going to be the 1 seed unless they, fall apart here at the end of the season. So I think there's title expectations now. Well,
as we used to say about the baseball team that was formerly known as the Indians,
yes,
there's nothing about Indians fever that a good 7-game losing streak won't cure. So, All right. Hey, also back with us today is Knox Pages reporter Grant Ritchie, this show's official videographer for yet another week.
Yeah.
Richie, another big weekend for you. What sort of madness did you actually engage in Knox County?
Well, we had a level 1 snow emergency, so I was out there doing wheelies, cruising on the streets.
Mm-hmm. What were you cruising in?
My Honda Civic.
Out there in a level 1, just ripping it up in his Honda Civic. Man.
Yeah.
So is that like a 4-wheel drive Civic?
No.
Did you go off-roading?
No, I don't even think it has a 4-wheel drive. It has like the low. I don't even know what that is. It's like a L on the. It's not stick shift. It's automatic. You would not want to see me driving a stick shift. I tried once. It wasn't good.
Have you ever driven a standard transmission vehicle?
No, my friend tried to, because he had a Ford truck and it had stick shift, and we got back when I was in high school. We were in the parking lot. We were trying, and I just could never get used to like having the left and right, using both feet and trying to
a lost art.
Yeah, so like a clutch.
Mm-hmm, clutch.
He told you
that's what it's called.
Yeah, couldn't think of that word clutch.
Did you guys happen to start American Primeval on Netflix?
I watched the entire thing. All 6 episodes.
It's really good.
The thing I noticed the most about it is, and I don't know how you film this stuff, but they filmed it in some way that there's like, it's almost in black and white. There's just like, there's no color to this. It's very stark, which I think adds to the
the colors are a little washed out. But I started it last night and I immediately was like, well, this is going to be well done.
Yeah.
Really, I like American history when it's well done, and it's very, very believable.
Yeah, some of the stuff I read about it, and you go back and look at the history of that particular time. And Peter Berg was the director. Peter Berg's done a lot of really good stuff. I'll do a quick look real quick. He directed Friday Night Lights, that sports movie about the high school football team down in Texas. One of the things I remember he did was the show Lone Survivor, story about the Navy SEALs.
Oh, yeah.
With Marcus
we talked about
Luttrell.
that last week.
That was a Peter Berg. So, Peter Berg is one of the busiest, I think, best directors for that kind of a, maybe historically accurate, maybe some things played with kind of stuff. But, yeah, it'll open your eyes to folks like Brigham Young,
right,
and the U.S. government. And
I did not know about a Mormon militia.
Yeah, that was. There were issues going on
And it's just the way of life. I mean, it's like 1850s was a long time ago, but not that long ago. Like everybody has a relative that has a grandparent that would have been alive at that time. I mean, it's just a couple generations back. Really, it's wild.
Oh yeah, it's and I don't know the actor's name. I first encountered him in the HBO miniseries that dealt with Atlantic City. Don't know whether you're familiar with that one, but it's again semi-true. But now I'm gonna have to look this up. You guys vamp for a moment while I take a second to look up what it is I'm talking about.
Oh well, we can always cut this part out.
We're talking about Boardwalk Empire.
Yes, Boardwalk Empire. And I'm gonna have to look. I can't remember the actor's name, but he played the main character's brother. He was also the sheriff of the county at that time, and he played the Bridger. Mm-hmm. He played Jim Bridger in the movie.
Okay, we thought he was Woody Harrelson at first. He sounds like Woody a little bit.
Well, he did a great job.
Fantastic, yeah.
He did a great job in Boardwalk Empire, and he's really good in this as well. So yeah, folks, if you haven't seen, what's the name of it again?
American Primeval.
American Primeval. It comes with at least 2 thumbs up from the Newsman Weekly crew.
It does.
Richie, I sure hasn't watched it. He was out rolling around in his Honda Civic.
I was watching the new Wallace and Gromit movie that just went on Netflix. It was pretty good. It was called Wallace and Gromit.
What's it about?
It's like a British stop motion animation where Wallace is he's like a tech inventor, and then Gromit is the little dog.
Okay, so folks, those are your
people watch Wallace and Gromit. Come on,
those are your 2 choices. You can watch American Primeval and get like cowboys and cavalry and American Native Americans,
murderous
and arrows,
Mormons,
and murders and death and dismemberment, or you can watch a stop animation that has a dog.
Yep.
Okay, those are your choices. Thanks to the Newsman Weekly. Well, my NFL season, I was talking about the weekend, came to an end on Sunday with a less than shocking loss at Philadelphia by my beloved Green Bay Packers. I'm not turning in my share of stock, but losing the last 3 games of the season did not sit well.
They made it one more week than the Cleveland Browns.
Yeah,
so
and
you're 1 week better than the Browns. Congrats.
Oh, thank you very much. But hey, folks, we have a great show planned for you today. In fact, it is so damn good that we're going to split it up over the next 2 weeks, over the next 2 shows. In a few minutes, we're going to be joined by Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bammann, Detective Terry Butler, and DNA expert Dawn Fryback to talk about how a 43-year-old murder case, and you don't get much colder cases than that, how it was recently solved, the 1981 homicide of 18-year-old Deborah Miller. I wrote about this back on December 30th in Richland Source. One of the most brutal murders in the city's history, went unsolved for 4 decades. As I said, among the coldest of cold cases.
Were you working here at the time of that?
I was a junior in college.
Okay.
So no, not even I was doing that.
I forgot you're not as old as I think you are sometimes.
Well, as old as I look, certainly. But we'll get to part 1 of that 2-part conversation in just a few minutes. But first, let's kind of talk about the news of the week. We had a Ashland County man come up missing last week. Over the weekend, Columbus police asked for help trying to locate a 25-year-old Polk County man named James Beardsley. Beardsley left a residence in Columbus last Sunday to travel to his home in Polk, but never arrived, according to Columbus police. His vehicle was found parked behind the Der Dutchman restaurant down in Belleville, located near the I-71 Ohio 97 interchange. Richland County Sheriff's Major Joe Massey told me on Saturday that the vehicle was found on Wednesday by Beardsley's father. According to the restaurant's Facebook page, which I looked up, Der Dutchman, about 32 miles from Polk, is closed. And is closed from January 1 through January 13 due to renovations.
Oh, okay.
So there would have been no one there for him, a good reason, I guess, for him to have stopped. The Sheriff's Office is assisting Columbus Police, Ashland County Sheriff's Office, and Belleville Police in the case. Major Massey said they checked the area where the car was located. They executed a search warrant on the car. They've interviewed family members, and the investigation is ongoing. Beardsley is described as 6'1", 200 pounds, red hair, and blue eyes. And if you want to go look at our website, we do have a picture of Beardsley there that Columbus Police put out. And you can also find Columbus Police phone numbers to call if you have any information about where Mr. Beardsley may be or what's happened in that case.
It seems kind of a grown man going missing. It seems it doesn't happen every day.
No, it seemed very unusual. I saw the Columbus Police posting on social media on Saturday, which is why I decided to make some calls and try to do a story about it. So we'll keep up on that, and we'll let you know once the case kind of gets resolved. Hey, guys, we had a Bigfoot sighting in Richland County.
Maybe it's connected to the missing man.
I don't think so.
Did you ever think of that?
The Bigfoot sighting came 3 days after Christmas on December 28th. Local guy, 35-year-old Andrew Baum from Mansfield, was hunting in a Washington Township field not far from Hanley Road, and I forget the other name of the road that he was at, but he was in a deer stand about 17 feet high and was looking out over the woods. It was near Hanley and Woodville Roads, east of I-71. And as soon as he saw Sasquatch, or what he described as Sasquatch, start to move across the field, this is a guy who spent most of his life in the outdoors. He knew what he was seeing wasn't something he'd ever seen before. He said it was taking real long strides. His head was down. He was moving down a hill. It had a really big head, and it was moving really fast.
Did he describe how tall? Any estimates?
He was about 1,000 feet away. He didn't really tell me a height, but he said if it was a man, it would have been sprinting to move across the field as rapidly as this thing was.
Is it difficult to take this person seriously when they're talking about Bigfoot and stuff? Or Richie, I'm just wondering.
Richie, I'm a trained professional journalist. I do stories when people tell me they see things. You guys last week on this podcast were talking about anti-gravity. Okay, so I don't want you coming in here.
And now we're talking about Bigfoot.
Yeah, I don't want you coming in here today throwing around integrity and stuff like that. Because when I posted the story, there were some people on Facebook saying, it must have been a slow news day, Hunnell. And I'm like, well, really, no, it wasn't.
It's a Bigfoot sighting.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
had
a slow
three other
news day.
things to do that day. But when somebody tells me they saw a Bigfoot, you know what? That's the third Bigfoot story I've done since 2021. Do I believe in it? I have no idea, but I will forever defend the rights of others to say that they saw Sasquatch.
Yeah.
He did report it to the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization. It was posted on the website, run by Matt Moneymaker. Some of you might remember Matt from his days back on Animal Planet. And I read the report. Moneymaker rated it a Class A sighting, which is the highest rating he can give to a sighting. So there you have it.
Why is he called Moneymaker?
That's his name, Matt Moneymaker.
That's his name, man.
All right, Richie, right now, stop what you're doing and Google Matt Moneymaker and tell me what it says.
And Hunnell and Moneymaker are good. They've become good friends.
Yeah. Matt and I go back. He and I spoke.
He has an IMDb page.
Yes, well, so do I, but that's neither here nor there.
Let's see.
He's a guy. He's a TV star.
He got involved with Bigfoot Sasquatch research while attending UCLA in the 1980s. During that period, he investigated a multi-witness sighting deep in the Ventura County mountains just north of LA.
Okay, I didn't tell you to read the Wikipedia page. I told you to Google it so you saw that he's a real guy, and I'm not making this stuff up.
What if I see the Loch Ness Monster out at Chuck Mill? Can I get it in the news?
Well, you know what? If there's a Loch Ness Field Researchers Organization, and a independent third party corroborates your sighting and does an investigation as Matt's site does, because they did send a guy down to investigate the claim, and that is part of the report as well. So get some confirmation from an independent third party, and we'll talk.
Is there a chance we could get Matt Moneymaker on the Newsman Weekly?
Actually, yeah, that's a great idea.
I mean, I interviewed Matt back in 2021 when a young woman was coming out of a gym, GYM, over in Ashland, and she was walking toward her car, and she saw a Bigfoot, a Sasquatch, rumble by the parking lot, and it spooked her, and they notified the website. And so, yeah, that's when I interviewed Matt at the time. And I'm certain, despite the fact you're poo-pooing him, Richie, hopefully he's not listening to this show today, because Matt will not like being poo-pooed by the likes of
I don't
you.
know if I was doing that. I was just asking how he got his name, but
It's his name. How'd you get your name?
Moneymakers.
Oh,
Matthew Moneymaker.
yeah.
Yeah, let's have him on this year.
That's it. Turn off Richie's mic. He's done for the day. Hey, the city of Mansfield and Richland New Hope are planning a ribbon cutting and grand opening in just a few months for the brand new Sterkel Community Park for All. Those of you that have followed this story over the last few years, this was an idea that came to City Council from New Hope Superintendent Michelle Geis. Came to City Council. Initially, it was a $3.5 million plan, but I think it was back in 2021. And as you might expect, prices have gone up, and they've expanded on it. The cities puts ARPA money into it. The counties put ARPA money into it. There was a great fundraising campaign that was done through Chris Harris's organization. It's about $5.5 million that was raised, and they've done an awfully lot, at least 2 sections, if not more, of what's going to be an even larger park. This is a park that literally is going to be ADA compliant. Kids of all ages, adults as well, any status of life. It's going to be a park, and it's really cool. I put out some pictures that they
I was
sent.
just looking at those.
It is a really cool place, and I think it's probably going to be in May when they have this grand opening. Right now, the park is closed for the winter, so don't try to go out there right now. But this all-inclusive park and playground off of Hillcrest Street, I think, is going to be, without a doubt, a big draw for not only people in Mansfield and Richland County, but I think people are going to bring their kids from outside the area to come take a look at this place when it opens. So congratulations to everybody.
Yeah, that's awesome. It looks nice. And that's where there's still baseball fields down there.
Well,
Sterkel, right?
Yeah, well, keep in mind, when you mention Sterkel Park to people, that's what they think about are those ball fields.
Right.
This is, you have to go through the woods away from the baseball fields to get down to this, to where this is. It's not connected right now with the baseball fields.
Do you enter?
You enter off Hillcrest Street.
Oh, so you don't enter by Catalyst and the Y?
No, you cannot. There's no road that will take you there right now. You'd have to walk down through the woods. It's off of Hillcrest Street over on the southeast side.
Okay.
But if you want to look it up, it's not going to be hard to find. Just don't go there right now, because they don't even know if they're plowing the little road that goes back into it. All right, one of the things that happens around here sometimes is we have drug raids and drug arrests, and sometimes those happen in other places as well. Last week, Bucyrus police arrested 7 people during a drug raid over there. It was an investigation that went on for about 12 months. They seized some drugs, they seized some money, various other things. So even in smaller towns like Bucyrus, drug activity is not focused just on the bigger cities, even over in smaller towns in Crawford County. So Bucyrus police that are associated with the Metrich Drug Task Force did a raid and arrested 7 people. Another story from last week. What might the 14 acres of former Westinghouse properties look like when they're redeveloped on Mansfield's east side? What about the former Mansfield YMCA site along Park Avenue West? The Land Bank was talking about those last week at their board meeting, and they had some slides and some artist renderings of what both might look like. Westinghouse was done through a grant through the U.S. EPA that was going to help as a market analysis for things that might be developed there. And for the YMCA, they had paid a firm down in Columbus, an architecture firm, to take a look at what might be done on the YMCA site. Published that story on January 10th. What was that? That was Friday, wasn't it? Yeah. If you want to go look at that, there's some of those artist renderings that show both those sites, what might they look like. And kind of the difference here is when the Land Bank started out in 2013, 2014, the goal behind the Land Bank was to demolish dilapidated houses by and large. You have a bunch of deteriorating houses and buildings that are never going to be able to be brought back to market standards, so they're just going to sit there and get worse. So the Land Bank's initial goal was, let's take down these old houses, turn them back into green space with grass, and then find somebody that might want to either take that land like an adjoining property owner or somebody who might want to build something new on that site. But a few years ago then, when the state began looking at spending money, large sums of money on brownfield cleanup and demolition, big projects, the land bank got in line and did some work. And that's where they got the money to do things like Westinghouse, the O.C. Hill, what used to be the O.C. Hill Neighborhood Center. So now the land bank is feeling its way through how do you redevelop these bigger sites? How do you figure out what sorts of private developers who might want to come in and do something? I know the first thing on social media over the weekend is, well, you can't spend tax money to build these things. Well, probably not. This is going to have to be attracting private investment.
Right.
But the work that they're doing and that they've done with these companies, with US EPA and this company out of Columbus, is to visualize and help developers visualize what they might want to do.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential. There's a lot of space. So,
Westinghouse, 14 acres. I mean, there's 14 acres of what used to be the A building, the old concrete slab, and a small triangular piece of property that sits across 5th Street that most people don't pay any attention to, but it's been cleaned up and now returned to grass for some time. But if you go on the website, you look at the story, you see the drawings, you can see them.
Yeah, those drawings are pretty cool. The only thing I'm not seeing is a plan for a minor league baseball team.
It's because you probably won't see a minor league baseball
Well, I'm going to keep
team.
that dream. I'm going to keep hoping.
Well, I will tell you the same thing I tell people when they say, well, what about a skating rink? What about a bowling alley? Why doesn't the city do that for kids? Folks, the city of Mansfield has never owned a skating rink. The city of Mansfield has never owned a bowling alley. There's absolutely nothing.
And if they did, it'd be tax funded.
Exactly.
So what do
you know what, folks? There is nothing to stop you from going out
Right.
and building a bowling alley and building a skating rink like they're doing over in Ashland County right now. They're building a skating rink. Kids are going to, and you can drive over there and skate at that, but that's private money. If you want these things, if you want to be part of this development once it gets rolling and you'd like to build a skating rink down there, I'm sure they'd be happy to accommodate you.
So when for the Westinghouse space, when do you think they'll really start moving? Or I mean, they're kind of very in an early phase. They have to kind of attract investors.
Well, the first thing they have to do is actually finish the development, the demolition and cleanup. That should be done by spring.
Oh, really? That soon?
Well, that's soon. I mean, they started tearing the A building down 3 years ago.
Right, I know,
so,
but we thought at the time that it might take a decade or so with all the cleanup they would have to do. But
and knock on wood, they've not found anything under the ground that poses, long-term threats or long-term restrictions on what could happen. When I talked to Richland County Commissioner Tony Vero, Mayor Jody Perry, they're both part of the land bank. One of the things they'd like to do this summer is kind of like pop-up outdoor events to kind of reactivate that space. Maybe some kind of, once it becomes grass again, maybe like a soccer tournament, volleyball, maybe even a traveling carnival, anything to get people to the back in their head that this is in Mansfield. And this space is going to be something cool in the future. Let's get used to the idea of being able to go down there again, because it's been 35 years, because Westinghouse finished shutting down back in 1990. So that space, folks your age today have never known that to be anything except a big pile of concrete crap.
correct.
So, and when they went down to Newark last year to a place that used to be a Westinghouse property down there. And I did a story about it, and I talked about it in the story that I did last week. The first thing the developer did there was put some sand pits in, and they had volleyball tournaments. And it kind of reactivated the place. And now it's got restaurants, it's got bars, it's got a place for live music. So the first step is get people used to the idea that this is a cool space, and let's start thinking about it in a different way.
Yeah, and keep the geese out.
Well, you can't keep geese out of anything, but at least maybe discourage them.
I think we could try being the superior species.
Wow, you think you're superior to geese?
Wow, just a little bit.
Dude, I got to tell you, I think geese are going to be here long after we're gone. Geese and cockroaches are going to be here long after.
All right, well, while we're here at the same time, we're going to use this for volleyball.
Yes, and let's get the geese out of here. All right, one last story to talk about. Mansfield native Matt Failer launched his preparations for the 2025 Iditarod over the weekend. He began the Copper Basin 300, an intermediate sled dog race that began on Saturday. It's going to take probably 3 days for that to be completed. So I did a story about Matt. He's going to run in that one. He's going to run in the Kuskokwim 300 in a couple of weeks. And then it's all part of getting ready for the 2025 Iditarod that starts on March 1st.
Which Richland source will have some of the best coverage in the world.
Well, we'll have some of the best coverage. I'd like for it to be kind of boots on the ground coverage. I very much would like to be up there covering it, and I know folks are trying to work on that, so we'll see if those efforts come to fruition. I can tell you, I was just checking the website where they have GPS monitors on these sleds, and Matt recently crossed the Gakana River on the Copper Basin 300. He's 187 miles into the 300-mile race. When I talked to Matt, though, he said, look, for this particular race, I'm taking 8 of my dogs. I'm borrowing 4 others because the rest of them have got to stay behind to help run the family business, which is Alaskan Husky Adventures.
Right.
They run tour groups.
Right.
He takes his bigger, stronger, probably slower dogs. He said, look, the Copper Basin 300, this is like a camping trip. I'm not looking to win this race. I really don't care where we finish. I just want to get these 8 dogs, some of which maybe haven't done this before. Acclimated to the notion of the trail. Now, the Kuskokwim in a couple of weeks, he said he'd like to win that. He's won it before. He's finished second like 3 years in a row. So he's taken his A-team to that race. And then everything will be ready.
Yep.
And March 1st.
The Kuskokwim, how many miles is that? Is that a shorter race?
It would be about 300.
Okay.
Hence the name, the Cusco 300.
Oh, okay.
But it's all about getting ready for the Iditarod, which is almost 1,000 miles.
Which is in March.
It's
correct?
in March. The official ceremonial start is March 1st in Anchorage. Where did my voice go right there?
Don't know.
God, it's like puberty took hold. Anyway, the ceremonial start is March 1st in Anchorage. They didn't have the official start March 2nd the following day in Willow, Alaska, which is where Matt actually lives and where his family and business are located.
So is this like we're in the midst of sled dog season now?
This is sled dog season in Alaska, even though it's remarkably warm. Temperatures, I think, have been in the 30s and 40s. When I talked to Matt last week and it was really cold here and snowing, it was in the 40s and raining in Alaska. He's like, it seems
no sunshine.
He's like, whenever you guys back home in Ohio are getting cold and snow, we're sitting here warm.
Yeah.
So,
but it is winter in Alaska, and they can't do it during the summer, right? Because there's too much melt, right?
Well, there's really where they do it. There's no snow.
Right.
I mean,
right.
Matt runs his Alaskan Husky Adventures year round. You can go up there and go for sled dog runs. They just put wheels on the sled, and the dogs have just as much fun pulling that sled as they do when they're going through snow, I suspect. These are dogs, Alaskan Huskies, that just love to run. So, All right, that's enough for now. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be joined by Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bammann, Detective Terry Butler, and DNA expert Dawn Fryback to talk about how a 43-year-old murder case was recently solved. Stay with us. Well, welcome back to the Newsman Weekly and part 1 of our conversation on how Mansfield Police solved a 43-year-old murder mystery. Joining us now are Mansfield Police Chief Jason Bammann, Detective Terry Butler, and DNA expert Dawn Fryback. Good morning to all of you, and thanks for getting up so damn early.
Good
morning.
Good morning.
All right, give me a minute to set the scene for folks who might not be familiar with this case. We're here today talking about the April 1981 murder of Deborah Miller. She was an 18-year-old Malabar High School senior who had plans to attend college after graduation. Deborah worked at the former Mr. T's coffee shop on Park Avenue West, and I'm happy to say I'm old enough that I remember many late-night coffees at Mr. T's. It was a short walk from where she lived in a first-floor apartment at 151 West 3rd Street. If you're listening to this today, don't go looking for that apartment because it's now a parking lot. Her body was found that morning by the building's owner and maintenance person during a morning visit. The very bloodied apartment showed clear signs of a struggle, but no apparent murder weapon was found, at least according to what I read at the time. We may find out different today. An autopsy revealed Miller had died from blunt trauma to her head and neck. John Allen, who was then the Richland County prosecutor, told the media she'd been beaten to death by a burner grate off of a gas stove. So I guess maybe we did have a murder weapon. Anyway, authorities called it at the time one of the most gruesome local crime scenes they had encountered. And for 40 years, this case remained unsolved, as cold a murder case as you can get. And then something happened. Terry, I believe you had a conversation with retired Mansfield Police Lieutenant Dale Fortney back in 2021. And I want you to tell us about that chat. And I know that Dale handled a lot of cases during his career at the MPD. What made this one stand out in his mind to the point that he really thought you should take another look at it?
Well, I've known Dale for a long time. We get together monthly, usually have breakfast somewhere. And it was just one of those mornings we were having breakfast. He's like, hey, I have this case, the Debbie Miller case. I've looked at it. I believe there's just needs that little piece. That case can be solved. And that's how it all started.
So Dale tells you that. You come back to the office. Who did you speak to and say, hey, I'd like to jump into a 40-year-old murder case?
So I'd be my lieutenant, Lieutenant Rob Skropitz. I told him about it, and it wasn't long. I had the case on my desk, and I was going through it.
All right, now, Jason, I know from a management standpoint, the decision to allow detectives and others to dig into a 4-decade cold case can't be easy. You've got limited resources, obviously. I know you weren't chief yet at the time, but how tough is it when somebody comes to you and asks you to allocate resources into a case like that when you got plenty of other more current crimes to work on?
Well, of course, and at a time when we were, or still are, very low in manpower, especially, up in the Bureau. And coming off of the year that we had in 2023 with our 12 homicides, I mean, that's very taxing. But, you think about the families and, that aspect. I mean, how do you not find a way to make that occur?
I know, Terry, how did you get started in all this, and how did you get Dawn involved in the investigation?
Well, we started going through the case. I reached out to Dawn. We seen that there was VHS tapes that were in there. The fire department took the video of the scene on that particular day, and Dawn and I, we sat down, we reviewed the VHS tapes, and it was very beneficial for her to go through, especially to check out the evidence herself, seeing how the evidence was placed during the time of that incident.
How hard was it to find a VHS player to actually view a VHS tape from 40 years ago?
Believe it or not, we have one in the Bureau.
All right, Dawn, so when you saw that videotape for the first time, and I'm assuming in 1981 somebody from the fire department had a handheld VHS thing they probably had up on their neck like this and were looking through and walking around the apartment. What did you see when you looked at that tape?
I saw a lot of bouncing around, so I think it was on somebody's shoulder. But, I think it helps visualize the apartment, and it also kind of showed the number of people that were in the crime scene. You look from an evidence standpoint, I'm looking to see, 40 years ago, they didn't wear gloves like we do now. So I was looking at things like that, but also the layout of the apartment, the victim, where she was located in the crime scene, and kind of trying to pick up on some items of evidence that I was hoping would still be in storage.
Now, Terry, when you looked at the tape from a detective standpoint, I mean, one of my favorite shows, police shows, was on HBO, was called The Wire. And I loved to watch McNulty and I forget the other gentleman's name, when they were working a murder scene and they were looking at different things. From a detective's eye, when you watched that tape, what did you see that kind of stuck out most to you?
Well, it's what you see, what we talked about in the first beginning was the stove grates. Those were cast iron stove grates on a gas stove. So they're placed over top of a burner. We did see those. Some were in broken pieces next to the victim where she was laying. Of course, you're looking at other items. There was aluminum pots that were bloody as well, and they were dented up. You seen broken handle from a pot near where the victim was as well. So those items there, and then the victim also had there was 2 belts that was on her wrist, and so looking at those items where she was left at, those were very, very good clues. Obviously, she was bludgeoned, but it was good. It was significance for the evidence as far as DNA.
Now, she was found nude, I believe, or no?
That's correct.
And so belts around. Where in the apartment was the body found?
So it was in the living room with one of her legs that was stretched out the boundary into the kitchen area.
Okay, but it was clear there'd been some kind of a struggle. This was
yes,
not,
there was.
This was not one blow and we're done kind of thing. This was a fight.
It was a fight.
All right. Well, Dawn or Terry, when did you get the idea that we could use DNA on something like this? Obviously, when you looked at, nobody's wearing gloves. There's a lot of people in this crime scene. There's a firefighter walking around with a VHS recorder. I mean, the first time I saw DNA was back in the O.J. Simpson trial back in 95. It was the first time I'd seen DNA used. And defense attorney just bludgeoned this poor crime scene guy from the LAPD. When you saw the videotape and you thought about DNA, were you nervous at all? You know what, we might be able to get DNA, but this might be kind of a corrupted scene kind of thing.
Yes, and when looking at the types of evidence I wanted to start with, I was trying to start with items that I didn't feel would be contaminated with, any type of laboratory personnel collecting the DNA. So my first kind of set of samples were samples that I was confident about getting a DNA profile. There were some cigarette butts in the apartment that had never been tested. That was my starting point. So I started with those, and then I also started and worked up a DNA profile for every sample or every standard that we had in the case, and that was the beginning. Being 40-some years later, I did not anticipate getting what we now call touch DNA or trace DNA, those low levels of DNA from something that somebody had handled. I figured if I would be able to get a DNA profile, it would have to be something that had a higher level of DNA to begin with, being 40 years later.
Well, it's interesting when we think about a 40-year-old investigation and 4-decade-old evidence. Terry, when you looked at the evidence, Dawn, when you looked at the evidence, how well preserved was it? I mean, was it in bags? Was it in cardboard boxes? When you think about it, did you go down to the bowels of the police department and dig out old stuff and lay it on the table? How did that? What did it look like? How did that work?
When I started, I pulled. We had 2 large boxes of evidence, and a lot of the evidence had been tested previously. So I wanted to make an Excel spreadsheet and just document every item that we had, how it was packaged. Did I see something when looking at it? And so I just opened up a box. I was all by myself. I didn't want anyone bugging me. And I just started making lists. And if I could see an FBI number on it, I documented that so that I knew it had been tested by the FBI. We had also used a private DNA laboratory around 2007 before I came to the Mansfield Division of Police, and those items had different item numbers. And then that allowed me to then look at those reports that were generated by those other agencies and kind of cross-reference. But yes, I just opened up boxes, and within the boxes, some items of evidence were loose because not everything was collected for DNA purposes. There were some, 40 years ago, blood samples were collected using pieces of gauze like you would get at CVS. And those pieces of gauze were in envelopes that were sealed up, paper envelopes, probably, 2 inches by 3 inches were these little envelopes, and it had documented where they were collected from and the officer that collected them, and they were still sealed. Some of the items were in plastic bags, which are not as good for DNA, and some of the items were in paper bags. So I just started making a list.
Now, while she's working with the DNA, Terry, what were you focused on when you had time to look at the case outside of DNA?
Well, obviously you want to go through the case and read statements that would have been that we had contact with people. and just go from there. Just get yourself a list of persons that you want to go and reach out to and maybe talk to.
Did it make it harder that the crime scene itself no longer existed? I mean, this was a building that is long since demolished, and now it's a parking lot back behind the Renaissance Theater. So did that make any difference to you, or just having that videotape and the evidence that had already been collected, did it make a difference?
I think the videotape made the world of difference. We're seeing it at real time, through the video. And like I said, the placement of the evidence, I mean, obviously we weren't there at that time, but where these items were, and like I said, how the victim was, just the overall view of the layout of the apartment.
So, Dawn, I'm not going to try to pronounce DNA. I could spell it before I could pronounce it, because I actually did. just did a Google search, what is DNA, and it's a lot of vowels. So I'm not going to try
Yes.
to. But how does it work? I mean, is it like fingerprints? I mean, guys like Terry, when he started work, one of the first things he always looked for at a crime scene is there a good fingerprint, because that was how the old days you definitely caught people. But is there like a federal DNA database, and how did you determine that the DNA that you were looking at belonged to a guy who turned out to be the ultimate suspect, James Van Est?
I feel like this could be a 30-minute conversation just on those questions alone.
Okay, we're going to do this in 3 parts.
With DNA testing, depending on the DNA sample and how complete of a profile you get, it can be like a fingerprint. And certainly, to a statistical level of significance, we can say, yes, Detective Butler contributed that DNA sample, that it is so rare it could have only come from him or an identical twin. With these profiles, as DNA gets older, it degrades. And I often talk about DNA like a big strand of spaghetti. And the pieces of DNA that we're looking at, the markers, are certain areas on that strand of spaghetti. But as the DNA ages and gets older, that spaghetti breaks into smaller pieces. And so when we look at certain genetic markers, if they're in between where that spaghetti has broken, we're not going to get a DNA profile at all. So one of the things that we noticed with this case, or that I noticed, is that the DNA was degraded, and at maximum we were only getting half of a DNA profile, just based on the age of the sample. The other thing that made profiling a little difficult or challenging in this case is you have mixtures. So we have more than one person's DNA in that sample, and depending on the mixture, sometimes it was mixed with the victim's DNA, and we were able to use her DNA profile to try to figure out who else was there, or what the other part of that DNA profile was part of. One of the really important things that was extremely helpful in the case is Detective Butler actually was able to reach out to the officer that collected the crime scene samples 40 years ago and got a DNA standard from him. He was willing to submit his DNA, and that helped to interpret some of those mixtures. And he told Detective Butler, I collected those without gloves. This was before the AIDS crisis. So that was extremely helpful. And it helped because we had a couple different male profiles from the scene. It helped to show what was true to the scene and what was from the individual collecting the DNA samples. So that was really critical.
Well, how did you connect it to James Van Est? I mean, is there like this DNA database somewhere, like the fingerprint center, where you can look for that and see who matches?
Yes. However, your profile has to be complete enough to be able to be searched in the DNA database. And one of the things we were looking at in this case was we do 2 different types of DNA testing. We do kind of a traditional test, which you hear more about in courts, and when we can say somebody's DNA, it's definitely them. In this case, we used a lot of male-specific DNA tests because there was so much overwhelming blood from the victim that traditional testing would have only given us a profile that matched Debbie Miller. So we used a male-specific test, and the ability to search CODIS, the National DNA Database, for YSTR profiles is very limited. I reached out to our state lab, and they have about 800,000 offender DNA profiles.
Is that all? Just 800,000?
For the state of Ohio,
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, good.
Yes. And out of those 800,000, approximately 5,000 of those have been tested for this male-specific test. So we were looking at a very limited database for a male-specific search. So we were very fortunate that at the onset of the investigation, a sample had been collected from Mr. Van Est. I was able to obtain his DNA profile from hairs that were collected from him at the time of the crime.
So someone, and Terry, you might be able to speak to this, someone who doing the investigation at the time did collect a hair sample from Van Est at the time?
That's correct.
Okay. Jason, I know one of the things that's helpful to Dawn and Terry and others is the Mansfield Crime Lab and Tony Tambasco, who I've known for far too long. I know every year City Council appropriates money to the crime lab. Tony's very good at going out and getting grants. Explain to folks how advanced, and Dawn, you can jump in on this too, how advanced the Mansfield Crime Lab is compared to maybe cities of comparable size or smaller. And without that kind of investment, these kinds of cases probably never get solved.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I can tell you from the start that most law enforcement agencies don't have a crime lab, nonetheless a DNA lab. And I was fortunate early in my career. Tony had just started breaching into the DNA. So, you know, I've told this story before. One of the cooler parts of my career was helping Tony. We would collect samples, and he would tell us, let's just test, let's try, you know, just grab stuff, things that aren't even pertinent. And man, I just took an enjoyment to that. So we were grabbing ball caps, pop cans, you name it, we were grabbing it, and he was just testing to see if he could extract samples from it. So for me, it's cool to see how he started with this passion, and he's just running. You're right. You know, the department has allowed him all these years to just run with it, and he has done an amazing job. I think most of our officers don't even understand because this is all they know. They think every department has a lab and has a Dawn, you know, and that's not the case. So we are very, very fortunate to have the lab and the personnel that we currently have.
I think the only thing Tony's more passionate about than that is probably horse racing and auto racing.
I would agree.
Those might be the only.
Throw photography in there.
Yeah, well, yeah. Taking
Buffalo
pictures.
Bills.
Yeah. Oh well, I won't talk about the Bills. All right. Terry, so Dawn comes to you and says, "We've got a match." Is that how that works? She goes, "I've got a match. The James Van Est DNA we found in this apartment."
Yes. So I was. She came to me. Excuse me. Let me know that James Van Est looks like he's popping up in our scene. So I was able to track him down up in Canton area, and that led to the initial interview with him.
All right. Now, Dawn, in this case, and I was going to save this for the second part, but I'm going to ask it now. How reliable is the DNA that you had? If this case had gone to trial, and a defense lawyer, assuming James Van Est got a really good defense lawyer and he paid money to do his own shtick, how certain are you that all these samples belong to Van Est? The attorney looks at you and says, "Ms. Fryback, give me a percentage on how much you are convinced that this is my client's DNA."
Because of the degradation of the samples, the statistical numbers are not what you would see today. So I had concerns in the fact that a lot of the profiles that I had early on that were matching Mr. Van Est, using those Y markers, I had concerns about the potential for a male relative not being able to exclude them. Mm-hmm. So the way to think about it is males in the same lineage. That would be you, your sons, your father, your grandfather on your father's side, are all going to have the same exact YSTR profile. So before Detective Butler went and talked to him, that was a concern that I had come court. He could say maybe he had a brother that was visiting him at the time.
Right.
Because at this time we had known that he lived in the same apartment building. So that was a concern. And the profiles that I did get that were not YSTRs were still very limited in statistical significance. However, I think looking at the case overall and the presence of that profile being on multiple items, all of us here are confident that we had the right guy.
All right, so Terry, did you call Mr. Van Est and say, hey, do you have a day I can come and speak with you? Are you busy right now? What's your situation? How did you make that initial contact with him?
No, actually, it was myself and Detective Swisher. We made a road trip up there unannounced.
So just cold.
Yep. So knocked on the door up there and did not get a response. So we went across the street talking to the neighbors. And while I was talking to the neighbors, I don't know, maybe 10 minutes, I see that Van Est emerged from the garage area, looking up at his house, see if I left a card up there. Told a neighbor I got to go, ran across the street, waiting on Detective Swisher. She's got our car to bring across the street to make contact with him.
So describe that first interview. Where did it take place? What was his attitude like? Kind of take us through that interview.
So it was in the driveway. Okay. I called his name, and I said, I would like to talk to you. And he's like, who are you? And I told him who I was. And Detective Swisher, she was just rolling up at the time. So she was recording. So I'm waiting on her to get there so she can record the whole conversation. And so anyway, initial conversation with him. He started recounting it like it was yesterday.
And he had no idea you were coming. He just all of a sudden,
no idea.
Here's Mansfield Police.
And I'm here to talk about the Deborah Miller homicide that happened April 29th, 81.
And all of a sudden, his memory is just crystal clear.
Right, yeah.
I can't remember what I had for breakfast 2 hours ago.
I don't either.
Okay.
Call that a clue.
Right. So then he sets up, and again, I never brought up anything with DNA. The reason why I'm up there, I know that he's in the crime scene, so he's our suspect. I never let him know that we knew that. So this is when the alibi comes in with the DNA in her apartment. And he puts himself in her apartment the morning she was killed.
Do you remember exactly kind of what your question was and how he happened to, give us a take on what his response was?
So I spun it like I just had this case. I'm trying to reach people that are still alive to interview them to see if they might have any more information that they could give me, for the case. And that's how I spun it with Mr. Van Est. And I learned through this first initial contact that he lived upstairs in the same building. He gives me a story that there was a homeless guy that was trying to get in her apartment and that he had chased this person off. He had told this to Debbie. She was appreciative. And then early morning hours, when he's coming back from a bar, he says that he made contact with Debbie in her apartment. She let him in, and consensual sex. He said he got sick, and then he went back up to his apartment. So that's where that was left at there. So
without even you asking a question about, he just volunteered. Yeah, I was in her apartment. Yeah, we had sex.
Right, and it was as soon as he said that, Detective Swisher's like, well, when was that? He's like, it had to have been. It was the morning she was killed. Okay.
That's a good suspect who will put himself in the crime scene the morning
right.
of. And without even being, there was none of this, where were you on the morning of blah, blah, blah from the very jump. He just put himself right there. Now, I asked this at the press conference you guys had, but Terry, maybe you can speak to a little bit more. Van Ness lived upstairs. Was he the second floor of the building and she lived on the first floor? Was he directly above her, or do you remember?
That I don't know. I believe it was 3-floor building. I know she was down,
Okay.
I believe apartment 1, actually.
When you were going through those reports, did you see anything in that initial investigation or subsequent that ruled him out as a suspect, or what did the initial investigation say about Van Ness?
Nothing much at all. So they were focused on another person
Okay.
in that case.
But somebody at the time thought enough to go ahead and get a hair sample at least.
Yes,
Since he was there.
yes, they did. So I mean, it's impressive to go back and look at these old cases. I mean, it's not like you can go through and put in plate numbers, run socials. You have the whole list on a computer. No, these. I mean, this is before that era, and for them officers back then to canvass the area, I mean, sketching. I mean, it's impressive. It's neat to go back in time how they actually did it.
Now, you had a personal connection, I think, with one of the first officers who responded. It was
My great uncle.
great uncle was actually one of the first on the scene.
Yep.
So there's some more motivation to try to get this solved. All right, we're going to wrap up part 1 of this discussion today on that note. Thanks to our guest from the Mansfield Police Department for being with us today on the Newsman Weekly. And we will have part 2 of this conversation next week. And I'll be back in a second to put a bow on this week's episode. And until then, remember what Mark Twain said: if you tell the truth, you don't have to remember anything.